Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today on Todos Santos, we are continuing on with this eastern portion of the city, and we're going to be building the city's main hospital or medical center, or really whatever you want to call it. It's the place where people go when they get sick or injured or whatever. But before I started doing that build, I was getting kind of tired of having these big blank spots, so I'm just going to fill them in with the usual sort of development. So we have just the standard swath of high-rises that covers most of the square footage of the city so far, with a few high-rises mixed in as well. And then over here by the freeway, we have this older, slightly underdeveloped, poorer neighborhood with a very irregular road network that I took from a random spot in San Juan. And with that done, it's time to move on to the hospital build. It's pretty much going to take up this entire triangular piece of land between the river and the freeway, as it's meant to be like really the main hospital that's going to serve just about everyone who needs medical care in the city. To make this place accessible, we're going to have a main road that runs all the way from the north-south avenue there up to the freeway here, and there's going to be a roundabout to serve as a freeway exit. Don't worry, we're going to detail all this up later. I just wanted to get a sense of where everything's going to go before I start putting down tons and tons of props, because we know how that goes. You put down a bunch of props and PO and all that stuff, and you just end up having to change it later. So I wanted to get the bones of the area set up first, and then we'll come back and do lots of detailing in this episode. In fact, so much detailing that I actually ended up quitting the game for about a month after I did this build, because there was just so much fiddling with PO and networks and props. It just got old, and I got tired of it. But nonetheless, I'm still very happy with the results, so hopefully you'll stick with me through all the building and detailing and stuff, and make all that effort worth it. Okay, we've got the main road set up. We're going to make some changes as we go, but before we get to that, I want to show you the inspiration that I used for this build, which is the Centro Médico de Puerto Rico. Apologies for my horrendous pronunciation. I try my best. So as far as I can tell, this is a pretty typical hospital campus, but what we're going to be focusing on is just the general cluster of buildings, the central plaza, lots of parking, roundabouts, a random water tower, and this parking garage that almost serves as like the entrance, as far as I can tell, to the central part of the hospital. And I think that's just a good monument to the car-centricness of Todos Santos and San Juan as well. So we're going to be using that as our starting point to figure out how we're going to build this thing and fit it into the landscape and the road network. So step one to this build is figuring out that these parking garage assets have many, many different sub-buildings, which can make it kind of hard to adjust to them with procedural objects. So I eventually managed, after a lot of messing around, to get this little parking garage entrance. And I just needed that visually because the back part of the parking garage doesn't have an entrance, and I needed the road to actually run like directly through this. So I just needed to go back in and blend that into the actual parking garage asset, which is not a procedural object. It's still just a normal building that's going to be functional. We're going to have lots of cars parked there. It's going to be great. So I went ahead and laid down every single building that I thought I might want to use for this hospital complex. So to start with, I have this tall office building that I just make a little bit lower profile with PO, just by grabbing the nodes at the top of it and bringing them down, trying to make sure that all the windows and everything line up in the resulting building. And then for the main entrance, I wanted to use these kind of little flower petal looking things that make up the canopy that comes on the vanilla clinic. So I turned those into POs, drag all that random crap that we don't need toward the back, so it's just clipped into the building, and then have them lined up here. So if someone was picking you up there in a car or a taxi or an Uber or whatever, you could wait under there without getting rained on. Hiding parts of a building like this in PO always seems to turn into a bit of a cluster, but out of sight, out of mind. So time to move on. I wanted to make the entrance down here a little bit more realistic at street level. So I'm covering up the gap in the building there between the PO and the ground with a second copy of the building, and just lowering that so that it makes sense. Also, we take this whole thing and copy and paste it over to the other side. Now, what's going to take up the main footprint of the hospital is this building, which we used for the university as well. I'm testing it to try to figure out what part of the texture I want to recolor, because I want to recolor it. I don't think that kind of weird, ugly brown color really fits the hospital theme. I'm going for more like pale blue and white as a theme. So we're going to take a lot of these buildings that have the right look but don't have the right color, and we're going to come in with PO, add a color rectangle to cover up the parts of the texture that I need to recolor. It can be kind of an annoying process to figure out exactly what stretch of the texture you need to cover up, but once you figure it out, it's pretty straightforward to adjust that. Anyway, we're going to go through and adjust all these main buildings so that they're following this white and light blue color theme. And if you're worried about losing the functionality of this hospital by turning most of these buildings into POs, don't worry about that. We're going to come back and make this hospital totally functional, or at least we're going to do everything that the game allows us to do for that. It's going to involve clipping buildings together, of course, but also setting service vehicles to access only certain districts. We'll get more into that later. Now that we've got the main bulky buildings of the hospital laid down, I want to get the main road network as well. So I'm trying to fit it in both to the landscape. Obviously, we have this steep slope down to the river, which we're going to solve later on the episode. That was something I avoided for quite a while. But then there's also just the shape of the buildings. There are various overpasses on this one, so I wanted to run some roads underneath, which I think looks really cool. I like the little lattice that you get on those overpasses. I just think that looks like a nice thing you'd see on a campus like this. And then, of course, we also need pedestrian paths. I'm trying to match them up with what we have already, so we have this little rounded one that goes underneath the main entrance, and then it also takes its own path underneath these overpasses, and we're going to do more of that later, but I just wanted to get kind of a baseline set up so I know where things are going to go. I really like this office building, so I'm clipping that into the other one. Like I said before, I really want to go for a really spread out looking campus like this that has a mix of medium height buildings with some of these lower rise ones as well. And so you just kind of get this sprawling look. And to get that, we just end up basically adding building after building after building until it looks like what I'm trying to go for. We have this, I believe it's SimCity 4 hospital here, which looks really nice actually. It has, for the buildings that aren't white and blue, I'm trying to go for this kind of just generic, practical kind of concrete look. And that one fits the bill for that. It also has a helipad on top, which we're going to add a helicopter to in a bit. This is going to serve as the main emergency entrance. This is where ambulances would pull up for this little oval of road here. And then on the other side would be the main emergency room entrance for people who were, arriving themselves and not showing up in an ambulance if they're so lucky. So now that we've got the main parts and the main themes of the hospital set up, let's quickly finish up putting together the roads and buildings. So originally we had the ambulances crossing over a at-grade intersection with the normal car traffic that's going through the hospital, and I didn't think that was really a good idea. So I wanted to have this little overpass for the ambulances to access the emergency area there. So this whole 4-lane road there is going to be dedicated only to emergency vehicles, and we're going to ban anything else from taking that road. And then to have the grade separation, I just lower down the main road for all the other vehicles, and it goes underneath. Of course, we're going to detail this later with some retaining walls and stuff, but for now, I just wanted to get the base layout going, and of course, there's still quite a bit of time left in this episode, as I'm sure you can tell, and a lot of that is going to be all that detailing that I said made me quit the game for a little bit. I mean, it was fun to do. It was just a little exhausting to micromanage every single little detail. So hopefully it's as fun to watch as it was to do without the whole exhaustion factor. I've tried to edit it down as much as I can, but anyway, let's keep going on with the build. So the next step in this build is to add some functionality into this place, because right now it's just a dead hunk of PO, which is a perfectly fine thing to do, but I really want this place to at least have some semblance of functionality. So we're going to start by adding some bus lines. This is one of the main north-south bus lines. It runs from the shoreside neighborhood that we made quite a while ago, down past the film studio and that part of town. And of course, as it goes right by the hospital, I decided just to have a little bump out from the avenue there and run it into the hospital. And we're also going to make a completely new bus line, which is called the Hospital Line. Don't know how I came up with that. And that goes along the river and then turns north and heads into downtown. Eventually, we're going to redo the bus network downtown and actually the whole street layout and building layout of downtown. And that's going to involve setting up a new bus terminal, of course, where all these kind of random seeming bus lines are going to meet up. It's going to be a lot more organized and interesting. But that's for another episode. I don't want to get ahead of myself. It just runs all the way along this avenue and again meets up and terminates at the hospital. Obviously, we're going to want people from all over the city to be able to access this place, and so having these bus lines access here is pretty good in that sense. Unfortunately, we don't have any rail lines that run by here. Maybe we could do like a little BRT diversion so that the BRT can stop here. I don't know if that's really worth it though. Moving on, we're going to make this emergency pull-in more functional. So we have all the other types of vehicles banned. We have these little garage doors here that will spawn our ambulances, and this is going to be the main source of ambulances for the city, which I tried to make functional by going around and turning off most of the other medical buildings in the city, hoping to force the ambulances to spawn here. It hasn't really seemed to work yet, but that's what I tried to do. Oh, and just to add some functionality to some of these PO buildings, I added in some 1x1 vanilla offices, just to add some jobs. And because there's often a fairly close tie between hospitals and universities, I also added a random university building clipped into this big office. Okay, so now we have that roundabout that we made before, and I think it's time to detail it. One thing that I noticed about a lot of roundabouts is that they have this red ring around the center. I don't know if it's decorative or if there's some structural reason for that. I don't really know, but I wanted to replicate that just using the, I believe it's the Park Life amusement park path, maybe? Anyway, we're filling in this somewhat apple-shaped roundabout with that, just massaging it with Move It until it lines up. And again, doing some roundabout psychology, which I talked about back when I made the university, filling in the center with some grass and a single acacia tree, which I think adds a really nice look and is a nice pleasant entrance to the hospital from the freeway. Of course, we're doing the usual signage as well. There's a fairly steep ramp from the freeway into the roundabout, so there's a sign warning you that you need to slow down to a certain speed in order to exit safely. And we're just doing a little bit of IMT work to make sure people know where to go when they're in the roundabout. I wanted to take the same technique that we did in the center of the roundabout and fill in these little triangles as well that happen where you branch the slip lanes into the roundabout itself. So I'm just using sharpened corners at all of the nodes, and it gives it these nice, well, sharp corners, and then you can just fit it into these really small triangular spaces pretty easily. And I think the final result is very nice and clean looking. I also adjust the speed limit to be something a little bit more reasonable for a roundabout. Obviously, we're using a stretch of freeway as the road asset for the roundabout, which is high speed, and we don't want that. So just adjusting that, and then doing the last couple things with IMT just to clean up the look and make it look a little bit more inviting. And a bunch more road signs, of course. And as I was building, I got distracted by this little stretch of freeway and saw this, which I thought was kind of funny. I don't know exactly why it happened, but I assume it had something to do with me making some adjustments here. Anyway, I got undistracted and went back to building the road network. So because the hospital is up on a bit of a hill compared to the freeway, I'm able to have this little bridge overpass just so it doesn't intersect with the roundabout, and it's not really a major road, so I'm not worried about needing people to turn off of this road to get to the roundabout or whatever. It's just kind of a little back road that accesses the development we're going to do behind the hospital. And there's not very much of that because it's not that big of a space, but we'll get more into that later. In the meantime, I wanted to provide a nice transition between these two elevations. So we have some retaining walls that prop up the bridge there, and I wanted to turn these retaining walls into almost like a feature of the landscaping. So I copy and paste them and flip them around to get these kind of cool grass slopes that have a wall on either side. And then I just try to blend them into the surrounding area with these grass props that just look a little bit better than the plain grass texture. And I just couldn't stand the thought of having this place be not fully detailed. So we're going to come in here and spruce it up a little bit with some of these plaster retaining walls that I really like the look of, and just line them up with the road. I probably could have just done this with IMT, but whatever. And I do the standard kind of sloping up in the center and sloping down at the edges that I like to do with these retaining walls to make them look a little bit less functional and a little bit more on the decorative side. Now I just have a couple more gaps to fill in to satisfy my desire for detailing here. I have some bushes and grass for these empty areas. I'm not a big fan of these tufts in this spot, but I just needed something to cover up the shoulder of the road, or at least to try to transition a little bit better to the grass. For the couple of spots of bare pavement that we have, I'm just using the normal damage decals because what else are you going to put in on these random areas of pavement? And it just kind of looks nice. It looks like there's a little bit of wear and tear and erosion to the infrastructure that's been built. It's not meant to be like super old and dilapidated or anything, but just has that little bit of grit. Now, in the spirit of making this place more accessible, like I talked about before, we of course need a pedestrian overpass to cross the freeway here. Just using this normal pedestrian path elevated asset that I really like. It has the green fences on the side that kind of fit into the aesthetic of the city, and the built-in pillars actually work pretty well, so I'm happy with those. Usually with vanilla assets, I find myself replacing the pillars. Not always, but usually. So it's kind of nice to just have an asset where you can set it down and make the elevated version, and it just looks how you want it to look. And then I'm going to contradict what I said and manually put down all these pillars because they weren't in the right spot. And then, of course, to fit this onto the freeway so people don't crash into it, we need to have a safety barrier around it. Just using the usual technique like we did back in like episode 39, I think. We just have it bulge out a little bit to protect it. Here's that connection up to the hospital. And then, if you'll remember, all the way back to like episode 21, I think, where we built the power lines that run across the hills. They also are running by the hospital here, so I thought this was a cool opportunity to have a little break in the urban fabric, and we just have this almost like avenue where the power lines have sole right of way, and they can just go here and cross all this road and stuff without any interference from development or that kind of stuff. And they keep that pretty well trimmed, so it's not quite freshly mown grass underneath, but close enough. And then on either side, there is a row of trees just to keep the power lines separated from, people doing stuff, because people and power lines just don't really mix for the most part. Now here's that development I was talking about behind the hospital. What I'm imagining is that this area with the giant interchange is probably part of a multi-year plan that they have. So back in episode 49, we started the freeway conversion project where they're turning it into an avenue. Eventually, their plan is to tear down this giant space-hogging interchange and replace it with more avenue that takes up a lot less space. And then this whole area here where all the on and off ramps are is going to be slated for more development. But they've already gotten started here, so we have a new office building and some areas that have been cleared for further development later on. Now, one major problem that we have here is the steep slope on the other side of the hospital that goes down to the river. Now, of course, I could have prevented this just by building the hospital at a lower elevation, but I just didn't think to do that. So here we are. What I decided to do is to make a retaining wall to bridge some of the gap, and then we have a little walkway. So if you were at the hospital and you had an hour or whatever before your appointment, you could just walk down here and stroll along the river, which I think would be kind of nice, I guess. And that's just kind of a half measure to bridge some of the distance down here. And then the rest, of course, we're just going to cover up with trees in a moment here. But to set up for that, I had to smooth out the landscape a little bit because obviously it was way too sharp of a drop for it to make sense to have any trees here. So I do that and then just copy and paste these clusters along the riverbank just to give a nice dense look. And to make sure none of the Sims walking along here go tumbling off the edge, we also have some retaining walls, some just these same plaster ones that I've been using all over the hospital, and we're going to continue to use all over the hospital, and bring that all along the pedestrian path. And of course, once we get all these details in, there's only one thing left to do here, which is lots of trees all over. And to double down on this look for the dense foliage, we're going to make sure that none of the grass texture pokes through by adding in our own mountain grass, of course. And might as well, while we're at it, add some more trees that are more on the decorative side of things. Now, for such a big thing that's going to attract a ton of people in a car-centric city, of course we need tons of parking lots. So we're not just going to rely on the one parking garage that we had earlier. We're going to be adding a lot of secondary lots. This is going to be kind of like the secondary lot, where if everywhere else was full, you could go park here, and it would just be like a really long walk to get wherever you were going to go. And you probably should have just taken the bus to get here, but too late for that. But anyway, the point here is that we're going to be fitting in a lot of parking lots into this hospital. And this is just the first of many. And now we're on the second of many. I wanted to, instead of forcing the land to be flat, we have this part where the main road dips down underneath the ambulance road. So I just wanted to work with the natural slope that came along with that. So I just make the intersections sloped so that they feel a little bit more normal going into the parking lot here. And then I just smooth out the landscape with landscaping tools, and that allows us to get a relatively sensible slope across the whole length of the parking lot. And then we're just going to take these wonderful parking lot buildings that actually have cars parking them, which is great, and copy and paste them everywhere. One thing that's really nice is with the realistic traffic demand with TMPE, Traffic Manager President Edition, you actually get lots of cars parking here because we have a ton of buildings here that people actually want to go to, and they'll actually park nearby based on the AI adjustments of that mod. So we get these parking lots nice and filled up, which is great. I also thought they looked a little bit bare, so taking some inspiration from the medical center in San Juan, I have some planters in between some of the parking spots. And of course, we got to give it the normal pavement brush and stain decal treatment, and these great rusted parking lot lights that I just think look really nice. I don't know if rusted is the right term, oxidized or something. Is that the same thing? I don't know, whatever. Anyway, we need some more planters on the outside of the parking lot, just because it looks nice. And we're going to copy and paste these acacias all over because I think they have that kind of nice shaded look that you would want in a parking lot tree. So people's cars don't get like absurdly hot, or at least more absurdly hot than they have to. I also wanted to have kind of a little bit of an informal path along the ambulance road here. So you can see those dry grass decals. That's where people would cut through if they wanted to get from the street over to this parking lot. Technically, they're probably not supposed to walk there, but whatever, they do it anyway. Also in the Real Medical Center, there is a Red Cross, a Cruz Roja outlet. So I wanted to have a representation of this venerable institution here in Todos Santos. So we're using this asset, nice looking asset, just add a little access point for the parking lot back there and make sure the trees go right up to the wall. Now, previously in the build, off camera, I had set up a system of like elevated invisible pedestrian paths so people could kind of make their way through the hospital and cross these little skyways to get to the different buildings. But I didn't really like the way the asset I had used fit in for these skyway portions, so I come back in and replace them with these ones, which I actually had forgotten that I had in my asset collection, but they look really nice and they fit the aesthetic a little better, I think. I also found a few other buildings that I wanted to add in various places because I felt like the hospital didn't quite have that sprawling look that I was going for. So we have a couple of campus buildings. Again, I'm thinking this place has a close connection with the city's university. So I'm not just using them for the aesthetics, although I do think, they fit aesthetically. That's why I selected them. But they also retain their university functionality. Technically, I designated this place as a university so I can actually, plop these buildings down without turning them into POs. So we're going to be having some university graduates getting pumped out of here, which is good, I guess. Although it's not like we're exactly starved for university spaces in this city, because I think we have like 50,000 spaces available at the University of Todos Santos. So we don't really need this, but I just going for like a little bit of like realism with the simulation. I wanted to try to do that. I don't know if it was really worth it, but anyway, this one I'm detailing right now is actually not a campus building. It's supposed to be a TV station, which is cool, but the building itself actually perfectly fit in between the road and the river here, and it even had a little angle where the river curves. So I just thought that matched up nicely, so I wanted to fit that in here. I did have to turn it into a PO. I think it's originally a unique building, just because I needed to lower it down without it messing with the terrain. And any weird visual glitches here, we're just going to, well, you know what we're going to do. Now there are just a couple of these university buildings left, and I had them in the wrong spot, but I realized that they pretty much fit in perfectly if I just switched them, so we did that. And then I wanted to have road access for as many of these buildings as I could, not just in-game road access, but logical road access for actual visitors, so that people could get dropped off here. Of course, for this one, that meant doing this really annoying slope, so I just have to come in here with a retaining wall, and just mess with it until it fits in and, does a good job of bridging the elevation gap here. So now I'm going to just remove some of these vanilla props from this building, and then in between this one and the other one that we just detailed, we're going to add a parking lot that's exactly the same as the other one we did before, just a little bit smaller. Next up, we're going to spend quite a bit of time on detailing the central plaza. So the problem with detailing this central plaza is that I wanted it to both connect up really efficiently with the rest of the road network and the pedestrian path network, and to just be integrated into the hospital as a whole, but I also wanted it to stand out and kind of pop, especially when you look at it from above. Our first solution to that is to have all these pedestrian paths. I changed them to these, again, these amusement park ones, just because I really like the red color. I think it looks kind of nice and hospital-ish, so we're going to do that. And I try to make them have nice clean lines and go all the way up to the edge of the road so that it just looks a little bit more realistic and integrated into the road network. I also line them up with the shapes of the buildings. So we have these curved entrances here to the main entrance and the cafeteria. So I just line those up, and then the rest of it, I figured it wouldn't be a problem just to have it filled in with the usual pavement texture. Of course, we're going to add some decals and props and stuff to spice it up a little bit, but just as a base, I think that works fine. I tried to make this place feel a little bit more unique by adding a sign to the entrance. I think I chose something a little bit too, let's call it weathered, for such a otherwise pretty nice looking hospital. So it's going to stay for now, but I might find an asset that's specifically suited to being turned into this kind of PO sign and to use that instead. And there's also the problem of the name, which I changed after doing the build. While I was doing it, it was called the Centro Médico de Todos Santos. And afterward, it was called the silly name that I assume I'm going to be titling this video. I'm not sure yet. But it also is prominently displayed on our custom ambulances, so I'll probably come back and change the sign out for an asset that's better suited to it, and also change the name while I'm at it. And that way, all the branding of the hospital will match, which would definitely be pretty cool. So before we get to the really complex part of the central plaza, which is going to be the very center part on the inside of the road, I wanted to take care of some of the more routine details around the outside. So we're going to do that, and then I'll meet you in just a second to do the complicated part. So for the central plaza, it got difficult because I wanted to go for this kind of grid sort of look where you have like two nested surfaces just tiled over and over again. And it just got really annoying trying to fit all these in with PO and like adjusting each vertex to fit with the curve. And I just didn't really have the right assets to do it. It just got really annoying. So I stopped doing that. I cut out a lot of footage of me messing around with that. And what I decided to do is get a nice clean line with the grass using these round theme props, just with IMT, and setting the step really low. So it basically looks like a rounded curve, which is really nice because normally it's hard to get that kind of clean look with the grass going all the way up to the curb. So that's not the sort of thing I do all the time because it takes a lot of time to do, even with IMT. But I think in this case, for this really central, important part of the build, I wanted to put in that effort. And then, of course, we actually want people to be able to use this central plaza. So we have a pedestrian path that just crosses the whole thing, so they could actually pass through this, pleasant area if they were going from one place in the hospital to the other. Now, I'd replace some of those grass props with pavement because I want this area to be a little bit of a plaza within the plaza. So you could go to this little restaurant thing here, or we're going to turn it into a restaurant and, have some healthy food like ice cream, I guess. Because that's the sort of stuff you want to have at a hospital, of course. And then we also need a bunch of tables here just to, make it look like a restaurant, but also to cover up just the ugly swaths of plain pavement. And they need umbrellas, of course, because it's always sunny in Todos Santos, except for when it's nighttime, which is, that happens occasionally. And I decided to add one little patch of trees there, just because I thought it looked like there were a bit too many tables. I also wanted a little centerpiece in the center there. And over here, instead of just having another restaurant or something, we have a little plaza within the plaza within the plaza. So there's a fountain and some benches and a stained decal, I guess. It's kind of ugly, but, it's better than plain pavement, I guess. I also wanted to cover up the unevenness at the edge of the pedestrian paths with some more ploppable grass. And add some trees, of course. And some more trees. And some more. All right, so I got a lot done really quickly, at least in terms of the video, but there's still a little bit of detailing left to do. So I wanted this emergency area where the ambulances rush in to not necessarily look nice. In fact, I wanted it to look a little bit worn down because it's, they don't worry about how it looks, they just worry about how it functions. So we have these expansion joints just to look like these big pavement panels, and then we're going to come in and just make it look a little bit more interesting by plopping down a bunch of grass tufts just to represent weeds that are growing up through the cracks. Looks pretty good. I mean, that's just a really nice detail that you can add pretty easily. Of course, we also need some of these handy trees to cover up the ugly terrain here. I also added some concrete walls off camera. And then there's this little pedestrian area here on the other side of the emergency area. I wanted to add some benches there so people could sit down. And then to block off people from accidentally going into the emergency area from the main plaza, we have these pipe gates, which I just really love the look of. Okay, taking a break from serious detailing for a minute, we're going to go back here into this area that I was talking about before, where we have a little bit of newer development and put down a bunch of commercial buildings. Not the greatest selection of buildings that I've ever made. They kind of clash a little bit and don't really look that realistic, but whatever. There's also lots of off-street parking, lots of parking in the back, lots of parking on the side, and it's all very dirty. Lots of dirt decals around here. And I've run out of ways to say that I'm putting down trees, so we're just going to skip that. Now we just have a couple more stops before we get to the cinematics. First, I wanted to, once again, make this place a little bit more accessible by adding a service interchange to this big, unwieldy, and kind of cool interchange. So it just meets up with this road here, which then proceeds to pass underneath the interchange and hook up with the hospital. It ends up looking kind of strange from above, but I mean, it works for people to get from the freeway to the hospital, so that's cool, I guess. And this is also going to hook up with another district that is going in between the BRT district that we made last episode and the transit station that we're going to make quite a few episodes from now, which is going to be a really fun episode. But that's basically the definition of getting ahead of myself, which I don't want to do. So we're going to go back to this, just filling in some last little details in this big node with IMT. Filling the whole thing in with trees, of course, because that's what you do with interchanges. There's nothing else you could possibly do with this space. So we do that, and then it's time to do some lighting. So like with a lot of builds, there's a lot of built-in lighting that already works pretty well in the buildings and on the roads, but there are just some dark spots here and there in some of these more custom areas where I'd like to add in some lighting that fits into this kind of modern look of the hospital. Anyway, that's it for the RSI of Todos Santos. As always, I really hope that you enjoyed your time in Todos Santos today, and I can't wait to see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.